Hello and welcome back. This is the fourth video in a series of Terraform in Azure for beginners. In the last video we created a single resource group and a couple of storage accounts, and in this video we're going to streamline our code, tidy up a little bit by introducing variables and locals. Okay, so we're back over at our client machine. This is where we left off last time. So we created a resource group and a couple of storage accounts. There we go. What I didn't show you, which I did mean to show you, was the fact that we can use another command to destroy this infrastructure. So let's quickly run through that. So let's log on to the portal again. Remind us what we actually built. So we go here. So we built this resource group and it contained a couple of storage accounts. Now obviously you can delete this on the portal, but obviously we're now managing it with Terraform, so that will kind of screw things up. So the best thing is to use Terraform to delete this resource, these resources. So Terraform offers a command called Terraform destroy. Oh, destroy, let's get that right. So what this command is doing, it's running off, checking what needs to be destroyed, what we've declared. It's identified 3 things to destroy. So we can see these little red minus symbols, so it's going to delete pretty much everything in that resource group and the resource group itself. So it does prompt you, it does require you to verify that you want this to happen, so we're going to type yes. It's going to go off and destroy that infrastructure. Obviously if you're going to do this, make sure you haven't got any data on there, so don't just run this in a production environment without real consideration of what you're doing. But for the sake of these labs, it's absolutely fine, because we're going to tear down the infrastructure that we've built at the end of each video just to keep the costs down, because obviously we're running on limited budgets here. Okay, so it's claiming it's all destroyed. So let's head over to the portal and see whether it's actually updated. It hasn't. Okay, so it's gone. Resource not found. So that's if I refresh this page here, it should disappear. There we go. So we've got a blank canvas again. Right, so the first thing we want to do is tidy up our code. So as we alluded to in the last video, we've got a lot of repetition going on here. So like, for example, the tag block, that's mentioned many times, 3 times in fact. We've got the word dev a few times in the storage account name and the environment here and the resource group name. And we might want to reuse this code for a different environment like prod or pre-prod. So we're going to introduce a concept called variables. What variables allow is us to specify a value at runtime, and then Terraform will use that value to populate some other reference. So the first thing we're going to pick is, let's choose location. So at the moment we've got the resource group being set explicitly to be in West US for a string of text. So what we can actually do is introduce a new block type of variable, and we can give that a name of location, for example. We can provide it a type. So in this case, it will be a string. So a string is a sequence of values, basically, which, well, it's a string of text, a sequence of Unicode characters, let's say. We can give it a description, which I can never spell. This is our location. And obviously then, so what we've declared there is that there is going to be a variable called location of type string and some kind of description. What we can now do is we can call that value here. So we can just type it var to declare that we're trying to call a variable, and then the location. So what that's going to do now is when we run Terraform plan, it's going to prompt the user or the person running the command to actually provide this value at runtime. So let's quickly have a look at that. So if we do a Terraform plan, it should, there you go, saying this is our location, please provide location. So we said rest US2. So now we've provided it at runtime, it's going to go up and plan based on that variable we just put in. So if we wanted to build this infrastructure perhaps in a different location, we just have to specify that. So the plan was successful. If we wanted to apply it, we would, but we're not going to, because there's no point, because we're going to make some more changes. Obviously, it's not very good that we have to provide it and get user prompted each time. So we can actually set a default value, which if doesn't exist, will prompt for the user to input some value. And if it does exist and you don't specify anything otherwise, it will apply it. So let's create a West US 2 default value. So let's run that again. This time it won't prompt us and it will just pick the default that we've set. So that was pretty much the same as before, but it didn't prompt us, but it does have the value of West US 2 in the location. All well and good there. When we run the Terraform plan command, it will take this default value and use that in location. What if we wanted to deploy this infrastructure in, say, North Europe? And we don't have to keep changing this value in the code each time. We can actually provide the value at runtime. So we can run something like Terraform plan var. So we can specify that we want to inject a variable into our command, and then what we can do is we can choose the variable name is local. Sorry, not local, location, and we want that value to equal I don't know, let's say North Europe. Can't spell. Let's start that again. Equals North Europe. So what that's going to do is when we run that, it's going to override the default and provide this new value. So let's run that and see what happens. Obviously I've messed up there. I need to end it with a double quote. Okay, so it's an invalid option, location North Europe. So what have I done wrong there? Clearly I don't know how to type. It should be location equals North Europe, not location minus North Europe. Right, let's try again. So that's going through, creating the plan, and this time the location will actually be overridden with North Europe. That completed successfully, so we're all good. So our new plan actually is not West US 2, it's North Europe if we were to apply that plan. So you can see how variables work, that you can specify default, you can provide them at the command line. There's also another way to do it through what's called a Tfvrs file, which I'll cover in a little while. But for the moment, just know that we're going to create some locations and we're going to use the defaults pretty much until we move on to the Tfvrs file. Right, so what else can we tidy up? So we've already tidied up the location. Let's work on the name, the resource group name now. So we know that all our resource groups for this particular project all want to be prefixed with that, but we want to change this value. Oh, let's undo that. We want to change this value depending on the environment. So the next obvious thing to create would be a variable for the environment. So let's create a new variable and let's call this environment, and we'll give it a type of string still. And we'll give it another description. And this time we'll call it, this is our inf. And we're going to give it a default value, in this case, of dev. Don't forget to put it inside the quotes, so it dictates it as a string. Okay, so what we can do now, obviously we know that we want that prefix to remain, but we want to change this last parameter here. So how do we do that? Well, in Terraform, you can use a process of, if you encapsulate $ open, close curly brackets, we can actually now refer to this variable and it will append it to the string. So that is now going to be RG, RPG, TF, and then -dev in this case. So that resource group name will be exactly as we want it, but this time we now have a value that we can just change once and it will change through further on down. So let's run TF plan, just make sure that still works. We'll get rid of that. So we've got a problem here. I forgot to put var dot variable environment. Okay, so that's completed successfully, and if we scroll up, we should have an environment resource group name of, where is it? There we go, and it's appended dev into the name of this within the string name. I've just noticed actually I've spelt environment wrong, so let's just tidy that up. Environment, and we need to obviously change the value here as well. Environment. Okay, so we've now got a couple of variables, one for location, one for environment. What else can we tidy up? So let's tidy up tags next. So let's create a new variable for tags, and we'll call it tags. This time we're going to need to use a different type of object, because obviously it's not a string. It's more like an object. So we need to use another Terraform type, and this time a map. So a map of strings. So a map of strings is basically a key and a value, and obviously we've got multiple keys and values. That's why we need to use this type. Give it a description again, and we'll call this our list of tags, and let's give it a default. And I'm not going to type this all out, so we can just copy and paste, hopefully, that straight into there. Didn't like it. Why not? Okay, it doesn't like it because of this up here. I forgot to put an equal sign. There we go. So we now got our tags in a variable. So what we should be able to do is now just delete this from here and replace it with tags. And same here. Tags, and replace this one also with var.tags. So that's reduced our code quite a lot. I'm not happy with the format actually, because I'm typing quite badly. If you notice that the text is all over the place and not really uniform. So there's another nice little command I'm just going to quickly show you. Terraform Format, so FMT. That should tidy up our code and make it look nice. Let's have a look. Yeah, there you go. So it's now moved all the blocks into the right place and put the right space in between the values and the keys. So it's a nice little command to have just to tidy up your own typing. Right, so we've now got a variable for tags. We've applied it to all these things. So let's just make sure that still works. So we've got a problem in our code here. What is it? So line 61, something wrong with, so I've got a typo by the looks of it. There you go. Tags. So let's try that again. Yeah, so I'm not a very good typer. That's why Terraform's my friend. I've missed something again. So in an input variable, the name tags has not been declared. Okay. So my problem is actually I've called the variable tag and not tags. So let's just make sure I've got it right everywhere. Right, that should be it now. Okay, so finally we have it sorted out and it worked. So all the code is valid and it's been confirmed by Terraform that it's ready to apply. Right, so what else can we do to tidy this up? So we've got the storage account name. In this case, we've got dev being injected, or not being injected yet, but as part of the name for the storage account, we've got the word dev. So we can actually use that same method we used here. So we can grab that and let's replace the word dev in each of these with that environment. So let's see what happens when we apply this. Okay, so we've got an error here. And why is that? So resource guest count name, storage account, environment guest. There we go. So it's basically telling us that the storage account, it's got an uppercase D, because obviously our variable is in uppercase. Sorry, here. But as we know, storage accounts all have to be lowercase. So how do we address that? So what we can actually do is, if we just remove that briefly, what we can do is there's a function in Terraform that allows us to change it to lowercase. So we can do this. See if I'll get this right. Lower. Let's get this right. Lower, and then we can now put in the value. So that's going to change that uppercase D to a lowercase d, and that should make our storage account name valid. So let's just grab that and place it here as well. And let's see whether that helps us. Okay, no complaints this time. So we're all good. And if we scroll up, we should see that the storage account name, if we just pick one, if I can find it, is now got a lowercase dev. So again, we can just change this dev environment to say prod, and it will create a storage account with the same name but with prod in it. So we're all good there. Okay, let's clear the screen. Right, so what else can we tidy up? So we've got a slight problem with these tags, haven't we? Because we've got a hard-coded dev in the tag. So let's address that. So maybe we could just put, well, we already know what the environment is, so maybe we can do var environment in there. Environment. So let's see what that does. So it's thrown us an error, and that's because we can't inject a variable into another variable, because both these objects are being provided at runtime. So we can't use a variable within a variable. So we can address this by using a local. A local is a different type of variable. It's one that's actually in the code. So it's kind of already defined. It doesn't need to evaluate through values provided to it at runtime. So we can actually make use of a local in this situation. So the first thing we need to do is just change this back to something that's valid. So let's change it back to dev for the moment. So what we can do is we can introduce this new block type of locals. And in there, we can actually specify tags. And it will be obviously an object. And what we can do, let's grab this, because I can't be bothered to type it. So environment, but now we can actually call the variable environment. Obviously the rest can stay the same because they're static. And what we can do is if we just get rid of this for the moment. And so we've got locals tags, and this time let's reference that in our tag. So rather than just tags, var tags, we now specify local tags. So what that's doing is it already knows what this tag is, and obviously as we feed in the environment variable, it's going to create it into this locals block. So yeah, so it's got around our problem. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so all good. So I think we've actually gone as far as we can. They've tidied up using variables. Let's just get rid of this now because we don't need it. Let's have a quick scan through. So we've got a variable for location, one for environment, and we've got a locals tags. Is there anything else in here that we can? Obviously, we could move that into a variable as well, but leave it for the moment. We'll do that in the next video. Right. So we do have obviously two storage accounts here. It would be good if we could just have one resource block but create multiple accounts. So we should definitely address that. I just want to end the video with a quick look at the Tfvrs file. So as I mentioned earlier, there is another way that we can actually provide the variables at runtime. We can create what's called a Tfvrs file, which contains the values for our variables. So let's start by creating a new file. Let's pick the right button. So I don't want to create it in there. We want to create it here. So let's call it Terraform.tfvrs. So by convention, Terraform is going to look for a file terraform.tfvrs, and if it exists, it's going to take the values that are in this and feed it into the pipeline. So let's just take, for example, which variable? This one. So let's do environment. So what we can actually do, very simply, just create a variable in here, and we can just give it a value of, I don't know, prod. So what will happen now is when we run Terraform plan, it's going to notice that we've got a Tfvrs file, and it's actually going to give all our stuff names of prod instead of dev. So let's see what happens. Okay, so that completed our errors. So if we scroll up and have a look, let's try and find the name of the resource group for an example. There we go. It's now going to create a resource group with a name of -prod instead. So what that allows us to do is, let's just get that out of there for the moment. So we can actually create additional Tfvrs file. So perhaps we create one dedicated for prod. Let's try and do that again. So let's call it prod.tfvrs. So what that allows us to do, so we can still put that environment in there, and we can give it a value of prod, but this time it will only apply if we specify it in the Terraform plan command. So instead of doing var, we can do var, I think it's file equals, and then the name of our file, so prod.tfvrs. I think that will work. Clearly I've got it wrong. Okay, so I've got the syntax wrong. This should be file and then encapsulate that in double quotes. Let's try that one. So that was successful this time. So as you can see, it's quite handy to have these Tfvrs, because then you can actually provide different sets of variable values depending on the environment, for example. So we could create another one for, say, test.tf. Let's try and get this right. Tfvrs. And in there we could have an environment name of test. And when we run the command and apply that file, like so, it will go off and create the environment, but append test to all our names of our objects that we've defined. So yeah, quite a useful way. There's other ways to provide variables. We'll discover those further on down the line when we start looking at the Azure DevOps pipelines and things, so we can inject variables at that runtime as well. So for the moment, we're not really going to use Tfvrs, so let's just delete those files. Just to keep it tidy. Okay, so back to our main.tf. I think we've pretty much covered variables and locals, at least the introduction to it. Obviously, we're going to cover a lot more as the video series progresses. So we're going to leave the video there. In the next video, we're going to streamline our code even further by using meta arguments, so for each and the count values. So really help get our code down to being nice and lean. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.